Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at all things Doug, looking at whether he was actually a mistake, looking at the ways that we could perhaps rework him in the future, and at the end of the video, I'll be ranking him in a few categories like damage, support, ease of use, competitive ranking, and also just casual ranking as well. So make sure you stick until the end. So today's video is going to be a little bit different, so let me know whether you like it in the comment section below. But anyways, we're going to be jumping into just my overall experience with Doug and a bunch of different things as well as to why I think Doug is really bad and why also, if he's buffed too much, he might be a little bit too toxic. But anyways, first off, we're going to be talking about my experiences with Doug. So as you probably seen by my videos yesterday, if you didn't, make sure to check those out before you watch today. But of course, I picked him up for the first time just from my sneak peeks as well. I thought Doug wasn't going to be the best of brawlers, but still, you know, considering he's got the kind of broken mechanic super, since he can bring you and your teammates back alive, I was a little bit scared. Maybe he could have been really good, but it's very clear, especially from the community as well, that Doug is really bad. So in my personal experience, I thought he was one of the most frustrating brawlers I've ever played. Honestly, he's so annoying in a 1v1 scenario. He can hardly ever win one. So for me, if you watch my stream as well, I was getting so mad. I actually rage quit my stream because it was so hard. I couldn't even push a rank 30, and that's literally one of the easiest things as a former pro player. Rank 30 should be a piece of cake, no matter who my teammates are. So yeah, he was relatively easy to push up to 750 trophies as well. Of course, he's a brawler that's really easy to pick up and play. He's literally got the attack of Jackie, which is one of the least skilled brawlers inside of a game. So his mechanics are pretty easy, but due to his limited range, I think it was pretty hard to really make use of anything. He was just getting deleted all of the time. So that leads on to my second point, which is Doug's overall kit. So Doug's overall kit is quite basic. His main attack is literally identical to Jackie's and not really fun to play. So of course, another reason why people aren't really enjoying him right now, because his main attack is literally Jackie, but probably worse. So it's not really fun, not really super inventive. His super has the potential to be incredibly strong though, hence why the dev team were actually a little bit apprehensive, I would say, with the release of this brawler. So I think it's pretty evident that they don't want to make the same mistake again. You can think past to other brawlers in the past that have had similar mechanics. You think of 8-bit extra life and you think of B honeycoat. These brawlers in Showdown in specific, you know, they weren't really the best in 3v3, but in Showdown, these star powers were broken, literally broke the meta. So of course, you got to take things into consideration with Showdown as well. But again, that's the main reason why they didn't want to make Doug too strong, because they were scared of this super mechanic, which is a good take. I like that there's kind of being patient with things. It's the same with Willow as well, right? You've got this mind control kind of mechanic, which can be very, very strong, and they didn't want to make her too strong as well. So you can see why they'll kind of push back on his kind of like main attack damage and whatever else, because they want to make his main kit weak and then his super pretty strong. With Doug, there's a lot of glaring weaknesses. Of course, he's supposed to be a support brawler. So for support brawlers, they're not going to be the best in terms of DPS and protecting themselves, which I think Doug's, of course, biggest weakness is going to be assassins getting close to him. He still has one of his gadgets, which he can double his damage, which can be pretty good, but of course, once those kind of run out, then he's very vulnerable, especially just to any high DPS brawler. But the main problem I found with Doug was, of course, it's literally his range. There's no way that you can close the gap to the opponents pretty much all of the time, which is a big issue if you're playing Doug, because, like, again, I'm not thinking Doug should be a brawler that you can just aimlessly walk up the map and destroy them. But you know, when you compare other tanks, you can think of Primo, you can think of Jackie and Buzz, etc. They have gadgets, they have supers, which they can close the gap onto their like tank counters in a sense, and at least do something. But Doug doesn't have any of that. So for the most part, he's actually just a walking feeding super machine, kind of like Frank in the sense they can't get close to their enemies whatsoever. You just feed them super, and then it just gets even worse for Doug. So for me, a lot of times it's because of his limited range, no way to close the gap, and a lot of the times you're actually leaving your teammates in a 2v3 because say for example you go off of your lane and then try and help your mid or your other lane, for example, then you're just leaving one lane completely wide open. So then the opponents are just going to pinch you, close you in more, well, even more so, and you just don't want to group up when it comes down to Brawl Stars, because you're just going to give the opponents so much value. So I just don't really get the idea of Doug. With Doug's biggest strengths, of course, is going to be grouping up with your teammates as much as possible to try and get as much kind of area healing. I don't know what the actual technical term is for that, but you just want to overwhelm the opponents quickly. So I viewed a few people's pushes to see how they were kind of pushing Doug so high, to see their kind of strategies. The first one I've seen, I think, was Cute Stands on streams. He's an STMN Pro player. You guys should know him. He's insane. But he was running a really sweaty composition. He was using Doug, Sam, and Cordelius, but you kind of got to think of compositions that can overwhelm the opponents, especially in Brawl. I think that's going to be one of his better game modes. So I'm thinking really cheesy strategies, so like Poco, Doug, and then like a Sam, for example, or an Ash, or something like that, where basically the aim of the game, you just want to run straight at the opponent, spam a bunch of healing. You've also got the double healing gadget as well. So what you want to do, you want to be making sure that you're trying to get as many quick goals as possible before the opponents have built their supers, have kind of used their gadgets and whatever else. So that's how you want to play Doug. That's his biggest strength for sure. So just literally running in a straight line. I think that's pretty much the only way you're going to be winning games, is by pocket healing, they call it, I think. In other games, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like Overwatch, for example, it's a few times like pocket healing, where essentially you're just sitting behind a big tank, for example, and just spamming out heals. You're pretty much doing nothing but just healing the person in front of you, which is pretty hard kind of strategy to kind of gauge in Brawl Stars, right? Because there's only 3 brawlers on your team. So if one brawler's literally pocket healing, that means there's only 2 brawlers that can really deal damage, which isn't the best strategy for me. And also, you don't really want to group up in Brawl Stars, like I already mentioned prior. It's because you're giving the opponents so much value, especially if the opponents have a splash or some type of piercing kind of effects, you know, like Ems, for example, Tara. You're going to give them so much value. So even with Doug's biggest strengths, I feel like it's not actually that big of a strength. And when you compare Doug to other support brawlers, so I kind of did this before in a video a couple of days ago, but again, Doug is in a weird spot where his healing is so limited because of his attack range. And if you need a healer in your composition, more often than not, I'd rather just prefer Poco, Byron, you know, other brawlers that are able to heal you from a distance, but not only that, just a lot more consistently. So, you know, for example, if you're running Poco double tank, at least with the Capo, you can easily pierce through the enemies as well, and, you know, build up your super and do it at a distance, at a comfortable distance. Whilst Doug, you literally have to be on top of your teammate, which again, sometimes that can be a really bad strategy to have. So in terms of DPS and utility as well, I'd actually prefer other support brawlers when you think about it. The likes of, well, Gus probably isn't the best, but when you think of Byron and Poco, you can actually secretly get a lot of DPS with those brawlers. So again, I'd rather just go a different healer in that sense. And even their supers are actually a lot less risky as well. Like, the super has potential to be broken with Doug, but from what I've tried, it's not really the best. So for me, I'd rather just go a lot of different support brawlers because they're a lot more versatile in terms of the comp synergy and also the map mode and choice. Meta also plays a big part on how strong the brawler is on release. So you can think of how it impacts a brawler like Doug, right? So with tanks, it is pretty hard for them to really thrive in this type of meta. You've got Cordelius, you've got Shelly, you've got Ems, you've got Tara, you've got B, you've got all of these tank counters out there that can just shut you down so easily. So when it comes to a new brawler, of course, it's important to look at it. You know, for example, if Shelly and Cordelius were actually nerfed or just weren't in the meta, I think Doug would be a lot more viable. You know, if brawlers like Mr. P, for example, were at the top of the meta, then Doug would start to shut them down for sure. So for a tank, it is pretty horrible to thrive right now, and especially because Doug doesn't have any kind of mechanic to even close the gap on them. You know, brawlers like Shelly are just going to eat you for breakfast. I was pushing a lot for about 2 hours, I've pretty much made no progress, and that is because, especially in this meta, and when you get above, like, I would say 700, 800 trophies in 3v3, pretty much every single game, you're going to be facing either a Shelly, a Cordelius, a Tara, or all 3 of them, or at least, you know, in the same composition. I can't, literally, I would say about 50% easily, maybe even 75% against a predetermined team. They're using Shelly and Cordelius every single time because they're just so broken, and both brawlers just destroy Doug. Doug can't do a single thing against them. He can do a little bit against Cordelius. He can just sit behind a wall and not feed him in his next super, but still Cordelius is able to mute him and just shred him at close range. So it is pretty hard. Also, with the introduction of a lot of brawlers in the game right now that have just some way to counter tanks. So you look at some of the newer brawlers. You look at Maisie, for example. She's got a gadget that can stun, you know, the dashing through Doug, stuns him, and you've got a super that can knock him back. So that's going to be pretty hard for assassins to thrive. And then you've also got the likes of Cordelius's mute, which is going to really affect tanks and just make Cordelius shred them. You've also got RT with his super. So you get where I'm getting at. There's just so many gadgets in their game, so many supers that can push back tanks, so it's going to be a little bit harder for Doug to thrive. So naturally, I feel like once the top brawlers like Shelly and Cordelius are nerfed, then he might thrive a little bit more. The next point is the potential of Doug and how strong he could be if he is buffed. And the reason why it's actually better to be cautious with Doug and it's in terms of balancing is because he has some insane potential. So you think to his super, that was the key point. When, you know, take yourself back to Brawl Talk, when you've first seen Doug and his mechanics, straight away everyone was talking about his super, the potential to revive someone. A lot of people just hated that idea straight away. Me myself, I was a bit reluctant. You know, I was really hoping that it wasn't going to be a broken brawler, because reviving someone, that is definitely a toxic trait to have. So of course they've got to remember that it can be game breaking, like 8-bit. Again, I keep going back to it because 8-bit extra life in Showdown was one of the worst metas of all time. It was just 8-bits everywhere and they'll respawning at the end, and it just wasn't a fun experience. So his potential in Showdown is scary. So I know not everyone will be playing Showdown that watches my videos, but probably quite a lot of you guys do, because I think like it's the most played game mode in Brawl Stars by a long shot. I think like 40% play Showdown every single day, which is a considerable amount. So I know, again, you know, competitive channel, but I know just back from my competing days, you know, you still got to look at Showdown, the way that certain things can influence Showdown meta. You know, you only got to take a look at Cordelius, for example. Cordelius is running all over Showdown with his super. It is one of the worst metas I've ever seen in Showdown, so of course that has to be fixed as well. But you know, once Cordelius gets fixed, it's just going to be Doug Showdown as well, with the reviving and stuff like that. So at least I've got to balance it out in some way, at least make his super not really game breaking. But when all things considered, do you really want Doug to be meta? Like, especially a really low skill cap brawler whose strategy is to group up with teammates and just make it a really toxic engagement. A good reminder of how this could look if Doug is going to be meta is looking back at previous meta. I must have said meta about 100 times, but take a look back when I used to push probably like 2 or 3 years ago. There was a few times where I think Poco was buffed, and I just remember the compositions, even in competitive. All it was, because it was blind picks back then, but literally all it was Poco double tank. It was like Poco, Bull, Jackie, Poco, Primo. It was just literally Poco double tank the whole time, and you couldn't stop it, even with a B in your composition, even with an Ems, even with a Shelly. Like, you could have all the tank counters in the world, and because Poco was so strong, it just made tanks too strong as well. So this could have the same implications if Doug was buffed as well. So you got to remember that. And also a good reminder as well, do you remember the meta where all of the tanks got that super trait, literally that made it so when you take damage it gives you a super? That was way too strong at the beginning. You know, this could have the same implications again, because Doug will synergize really well with tanks, and it would just be a really brainless toxic meta. So we don't really want that, do we, guys? So Doug's introduction to the meta could easily have the same effects, with the ability to just overwhelm the opponents. So if he isn't balanced properly, he could really break the meta in a bad way. So perhaps it's probably best he's never meta. The next point is, how do we actually go about buffing Doug, but in the right way? So you got to be a little bit careful, because he's very similar to Jackie. Do you want another Jackie brawler that has constant damage in that area and just running up to people brainlessly? You know, Jackie isn't the best in the meta, so we need to think of more inventive ways to perhaps make Doug a little bit more appetizing. I don't know what the word is, but there's several angles you can actually take on this. One thing is that he needs multiple buffs for sure to even make him usable. So the first buff for me is his range is clearly his biggest weakness, so they could just combat this by multiple ways. So of course they could literally just increase his attack radius, which will be a little bit better. It means he'll be able to peek around walls a little bit better, of course be able to get closer to the opponents and deal damage more consistently. And of course he won't actually deal that much damage still, because at the edge of his area he only deals like 900 damage, but at least then he's allowed to cover more area, allowed to heal more of his teammates. I think that could be a nice change, which isn't too toxic. Or there's actually a weird angle, which I actually thought, you know, maybe might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I think maybe making him very fast. We've seen how Shelly recently became one of the best brawlers with very fast movement speed. I think it could be a good angle, because then there's no gadget. I mean, Doug, he's still really limited in range, but very fast increases his range in some ways, and at least allows him to heal up his teammates a little bit better. Of course, it could be a bit too toxic, but I kind of like that angle. Or buff number 2, I mean, he needs several buffs probably, but It's just a few in particular. I think one that is really annoying to me is his super. So his super can't go through a wall right now, which is really annoying for me. You know, you think of Gus in the past when he first came out. I think it was one of the reasons why he just felt terrible, because you couldn't super through a wall. I think it'll be a nice change. I don't think it'll be too toxic whatsoever. You think Cordelius' super, you can literally shoot that through a wall. So why can't you shoot this Doug super through a wall? So I think it'll be good value. And the thing is, I don't think his super is actually that game breaking. I've really struggled to get value a lot of the times, and when I did connect it onto my teammate, I don't think I've had a single time where they've actually died. I've not really timed it the best a lot of the times. And you know, even if they do resurrect, they just pretty much die all of the time. The opponents know where they're going to come from and can just destroy them quickly. So probably needs there were some buffs to his super, but of course not too much. So now we're going to be ranking a few of his categories, just so you guys get an idea of how strong I think he is. So in terms of damage, then of course he's a support brawler, so his damage is going to be near the bottom, and of course he still has somewhat okay damage in some ways. You know, if the opponent gets up close, he can deal like 3,600, I think it is, with the click of a green button, so that can be pretty good. But of course, once those gadgets run out, I think he has one of the worst damages in the game. But of course, he's a support brawler, he's supposed to have low damage. And then going into his support then, so in terms of how good of a support brawler he is right now, he's probably near the bottom. If I was to rank all support brawlers in the game, he'll be near the bottom, but I think definitely he's going to get some buffs soon. So I could easily see him rising pretty much to the top, because I think once people learn to adapt and how to play Doug, yeah, I think he'll be a good healer. So I think support somewhere in between, because that super as well has potential to be game breaking. Ease of use, I think in terms of being able to pick up and play him, he's like probably an 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, really easy to use. In terms of competitive ranking, I think probably like a 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10. I think there might be some cheesy strategies down the line once he's buffed, but right now he's at the bottom. And then casual ranking as well, I think he'll be a kind of decent casual brawler in a sense. You know, you think of brawlers like Jackie and Frank, they actually have a good win rate on Brawl Ball in like the 700 trophy range, so I think he'll be kind of that type of brawler. But still, literally everyone on my Twitter thought he was pretty bad. So let me know what you think of Doug in the comment section below. How would you actually buff him? There's multiple ways we can go about this, but that's gonna be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.